we are not our children's voices. Yeah, we speak up for them when they're young, but that can't be a lifelong habit of ours. We have to model and help our children develop their own advocacy skills because that's the most important. I don't know, one of the most important skills, right? Besides relationships, is for your child to be able to advocate for themselves. And I know as a parent, when Dylan was younger, one of the things that I always sought out was opportunities for me to hear from self advocates because self advocates have so much that we can learn from. And today we are going to be lucky because we have a self advocate with us who I knew when we were both living in Colorado. And um, I I just think back on the times that I was able to hear Ian speak and the engaging stories that he tells and how much it got me thinking about things and sometimes crying and often laughing too. So, if you are new to the show, I am Charmaine Tanner. I am a retired teacher, a parent of a son, Dylan, with Down syndrome, and I also do full time advocacy for families. So, I am so pleased that you are here because we are going to welcome our guest in. And here we have Ian Watlington. And Ian, I am just so thrilled that we connected and we were able to find some time in your calendar for you to be with our audience. So welcome, welcome, Ian.
Thank you, Charmaine. And boy, it's been a minute since we've seen each other, and it's been even more minutes since we've seen each other in person. So um, we both dared to leave Colorado, and so that is I'm broadcasting to you from Washington D.C., my little shoebox of an apartment, and so yeah, it's good to see you.
Well, I remember Ian when you were doing advocacy and policy work at the Arc of Jeffco, Jefferson County in Colorado, and then when you were also doing advocacy and policy work for Advocacy Denver, and now you're in Washington, D.C. at the National Disability Rights Network.
Mhm.
So that is like so interesting because I'm sure now you have this national perspective. So, if you want to share a bit about what your work entails now, I think people would be interested in that.
Okay. Sure. Let me first do the caveat that I always do in my appearances is that I may speak about the National Disability Rights Network, but I'm not speaking for them, and I'm not officially representing them. I don't think I'm going to say anything that they would find objectionable or that we would disagree on. But I just want to make that clear that there's this line for today's presentation. And what I mainly do is work on a mental health grant and work with people who have mental health conditions and their advocacy in doing some systems change around the mental health service system, which is abominable around the country,
I've
or
been,
or it's um, or it's just a skeleton of a system and not a robust system that's really meeting people's needs. And we're, of course, always fighting for, um, you know, it's be careful what you wish for. And we don't want people stuck in a big system, but we also think that people have needs and there's a lot of unmet needs. So I do some of that. I work with some of the self advocacy, um, a self I was going to say networks, and they are networks on the national level, and I may mention some of them, and then Charmaine may scurry and get their web link. So I get to work with them on various projects. It's fun. I I have a colleague that works with self advocates just on the issue of voting, and
Uh,
that's interesting to see that roll out and to see the trickle down effect of that. I do just general kind of liaison work with them, and then if you wouldn't believe it or not, I wouldn't have ever guessed this, but I work on information and referral, and basically how when we talk to parents at first in the network, how do we do with that information, and what different ways people kind of handle their call load or anything. I'll do a quick little introduction to the PNA network, if that is okay.
yeah, I think that would be really helpful.
Okay. PNA stands for Protection and Advocacy, and um, most, not all, to our chagrin, sometimes, but most PNAs are disability rights, and then a state. Disability rights Idaho, disability rights Ohio, disability law Colorado. Um, and so we are the National Disability Rights Network is the membership organization of these legal based civil rights, mostly nonprofits in the United States, the territories, and we have a Native American one. And you can go on NDRN.org. So that's NDRN.org, National Disability Rights Network, and find out where your protection and advocacy um, agency is. So, why do we have protection and advocacy agencies? Well, basically, in the 80s, early 80s, there were several exposés about the conditions of institutions. And it was mainly institutions for people with all types of disabilities, but largely intellectual disabilities. And the conditions were awful. And it was a scandal that Congress couldn't ignore, that the public couldn't ignore. So therefore, they created this network of legal based nonprofits, mainly. Some of them are still in state government, um, to fight for and to be protection, to protect and advocate for people with disabilities. And we now have 9 separate programs and streams. We do education. We do, I'm not going to probably remember them all right now, voting. We do representative payee work. We do folks with intellectual disabilities, folks with mental health conditions. We are a cross disability network. So basically, any disability you can think of, we would consider there would be a place that we could plug you in and maybe provide some kind of either information and referral or some kind of legal services. It's not a guarantee that you'll get a lawyer and they'll automatically take your case and things like that. And it has to be an issue related to your disability. We don't do divorces or things like that because that's not a disability or civil rights issue. So and sometimes we work in tandem with the legal aid to get some of those issues. A lot of Social Security benefits stuff. This is just so you know, a lot of people don't even know that this network of organizations exists. So it is in every state, every territory, and then the four corners is the Native American PNA. So
Well, and thank you, because I forget about all those different areas too. So I'll make sure I'll send out a newsletter tomorrow with the show notes, and so I'll make sure that I write those different areas in, because I think some of us don't realize the assistance that we can seek out, and even by going to your national website, that has a lot of resources for people too. So
yeah,
I just see that Lissa has joined us. She's in Idaho, and I know mental health has been something that Lissa has been advocating for as far as appropriate services. So, Lissa, I'm glad you're here to hear Ian today.
yeah, Elissa, welcome. And I'm a compadre because I'm fighting a mental health battle, and it is it is something, and or it isn't something, as the case may be. And so, um, I also, just to give you a little bit more background, just a tidbit more, and then we'll talk about some stories and go into some. I used to do special ed advocacy with families like Charmaine does now, and I did it in two different districts, a suburban district and an urban district in Colorado. And I worked with families, as Charmaine does as well, and did and fighting for inclusion. And I ended up when I finished my uh, or not finished because I'm not done, but when I took a hiatus, um, I was doing a lot of early childhood stuff and then doing kind of the other end. So I'm one of those advocates that likes the I will do any advocacy, or I did any advocacy in the middle, even. But I kind of became
Hmm.
especially interested in the beginning and then the transition years, and that was how I did it. And I just I'm gonna be truthful that I just got burned out, and I decided I can't do the individual stuff as much anymore, and I, or at least I need a break. That's the least what it was. And I wanted to do something on a national level to see if we could get some more systems change stuff done. And I don't know about you, Charmaine, but I sometimes feel frustrated because I feel like, at least in the education world, we've made some inroads, but honestly, the same calls keep coming in, and with the same issues. And how old is IDEA now? And it's just like I, it's truly amazing. I will say, from a national level, we, having worked at the National Disability Rights Network for nearly 11 years now. I can't believe that, but it's happened. And I have seen um, friendly justice, friendly departments of ed, and Justice Department, DOJ, and not so friendly Justice Departments and DOJs around really getting on top of school districts and making sure that we well, that the kids or students are getting the services they need, because the our government at the national level plays a role on putting pressure on states to do certain things, and or not do certain things in the case of restraint and seclusion and things like that. But we at the National Disability Rights Network, not me in particular, but we develop relationships with those people at the national level and kind of push for what I would call a more student centered, progressive, inclusive um, education model. And what we're finding on the national level is still some of the same stuff at the local level that people are fighting, and we just need to make sure that all levels of government know this and are putting pressure so we're going the right direction. So
Exactly. And I think about, yeah, the questions that I get today and the families that I'm working with today have the same issues I was having, 30 some years ago with Dylan, and trying to get him included in such. And we have a membership group for parents called the Trailblazers. And one of the things that I remind
I
us
love that
all
name.
about is the trail grows over very fast. So yes, we can be forging and getting these, new services, or, more inclusive education for our child. But unless you have a lot of parents coming right after you, that trail gets overgrown.
Mhm.
And that's the frustrating part for me is, and I agree with you. Like, one of the things that I look at, Ian, is like, I have done individual advocacy for a long time, and it takes a long time to make change when we're doing it one child at a time. So
Exactly.
I'm trying to look at how can I support more systemic change,
Mhm.
and still keep touch with what individual parents are saying.
Right.
But and I think you've always done such an excellent job of that, as far as staying in touch with how other families and self advocates, are thinking and feeling. Um, and the life that you have lived and the experiences that you have had, are such lessons for us. And I just appreciate you. And also, I would love to meet your mom Sue someday, because I know she was just a big influence in your life too.
Oh, huge, huge. And she still is. And she's still uh, pushing me and pushing things and helping me out in different ways. And I will say it really does take, it's a slog sometimes, but it does take having parents that are in for the, it's not always a fight. So I don't always like to use that verb or that noun, but it sometimes is. And when I was younger, I started my, I'm getting up there in years now. I'm just to give people perspective. I'm 45 now, and I entered the school system when I was 3, and I was a little bit. There wasn't Part C um, as much, the 0 to 3 stuff. But I was in a segregated school, and the principal and the social worker at some meeting or something told my mom, "Well, this is just an amazing program, an amazing school. They're doing their dog and pony show, and he can even graduate here when he's 21." And my mom looked around and just saw people with disabilities and was like, "Uh-oh, this is not this is not the vision I have for my kid." Not that being educated around other children with disabilities is horrible in and of itself, but we want to we want to educate children in a way the world looks, and the world is full of all sorts of different people with all sorts of different things going on. And we want to at least, I think I've grown up to understand, um, we want our children, or I want children, to be educated in the world that is, so they can make the world that ought to be.
Hmm.
Um, that's what I really, really hope. And that's what my mom saw. And luckily it was early enough. She was able to get me into a typical kindergarten,
Hmm.
and we had fights throughout, little battles, disagreements throughout elementary school and middle school, especially around. And I want to talk about this a little bit too. It's one of my more, I get in more discussions about this than any other topic, and that is the role of therapies and interventions in kids' lives. And what I worry about, what I worry about is that what we do is therapize and pathologize kids, and we forget that they're just kids. And what was a big deal for me growing up was having my mom remind the system, and later me remind the system, that I wanted to be out and about doing things just like everybody else. And I also needed some of those services. But how do you balance that with kind of, you're paying some price for the therapy, obviously, literally and figuratively. You're we only have so much time in a day, and so it's like, where does the social time come in? And are we taking our kids' social time away for therapies? And therapies are very important, but also just experiencing the playground with kids, getting involved and doing other things like clubs and things like that. So, if to the parents that are watching or will watch, just keep a balance of those services. I'm not saying that, for God's sakes, don't get on the phone with your speech therapist, tonight, and cancel all your appointments. I'm not saying that. But if you're finding that all you're doing is going from therapy to therapy to therapy to intervention, that makes me nervous. And that made me, and when we hit a threshold in growing up for me, where we had to cut back on some of those therapies and go the social route and go and do some of the integrated things. And you would have thought that my mom, when she said no to some, you would have thought that she said something horrible or abusive, or they gave her quite the
Hmm.
guilt. Um,
Hmm.
and all she was doing was listening to her kid and what I was telling her through different ways, through my behavior, sometimes through actual conversations, was, I'm I'm overstimulated by all this intervention, and I just want to be a kid. And so I so she pulled that back a little bit, and we had discussions about that. So if I can give a little lesson about that, I would just say we've got to be really we've got to be really careful that what we don't have is kids growing up with an adult provider all the time with them.
Right.
That's a I wouldn't be as successful as I am today. I'm almost sure of it, because if I had just been in
Yeah.
therapy all the time, always getting some kind of intervention, even though those interventions are marketed as absolutely necessary. Well, a balance is necessary. I don't know if always those interventions are doing. And again, I'm not encouraging you to cancel all your appointments. I'm just encouraging you to listen to your kid. And just me as a kid, it was a great relief to sometimes not go to the therapy and not have to always do the hard stuff with that adult in that room kind of thing. And
Yeah,
just go
and
out.
go ahead. I'm sorry.
That all I wanted to do was go out and play.
Right.
And
Yeah, and that, and I think back to Kathy Snow, and I know she had similar conversations with her son Benjamin about that when he was young. Um, and the other kids would talk about what they're doing after school, if they're going to go play some baseball or they're going to go ride bikes or whatever. And Benjamin was like, I have therapy after school, and after a while, it was like, Mom, I don't want to do this anymore. And I think that's why also we're such big proponents of push-in services,
exactly.
when kids are in school. So, for Dylan, when he was on the playground, that's when the physical therapist would come and she'd go on the playground and help him, walk up the steps to the ladder of the slide, which made a lot more sense than in a therapy room where you walk up a few
Exactly.
steps and there's nothing and you turn around and have to walk back down. So
Right.
the push-in services too can make such a huge difference in the school environment.
Absolutely. And we're not always going to be surrounded by, you know, someone with their master's degree in a resource room. We're
Right.
That's not how the world looks. And so again, just to repeat, I'm for kind of educating and providing services in the world that is. And so that kids can later create the world that ought to be. So
I love that. I love that. Yeah, and Lissa was saying too that her son learned how to ride his bicycle with his
mhm.
therapist, and so think of how much freedom that gives him, right? And he can go
Absolutely.
out and about.
And talk about a functional skill. It
Right,
wasn't just to get his muscles going, It was to ride a bike. And so there's that incentive. I remember I um I have I have cerebral palsy, by the way. If anybody out there is curious, and so I have some dexterity issues as well. And I remember, I think it was in sixth grade. Um, I I couldn't cut my own food up, and I was always having to have someone cut my food up. Well, at about sixth grade, fifth or sixth grade, that's no longer real cool. I was, and I wanted to be cool. I wanted to be like everybody else. You know, that crazy stage in life when you want to be different, but just like everybody else. And that age group is just a wild time. And my occupational therapist, my mom provided the money, and we would go out to eat and
um,
practice
um,
um, cutting up food, so that I had some of those skills, or I could do a better job at least. And that was a functional piece, and I saw the reward.
right,
Oftentimes, I think we um, put folks in, and they don't see the reward. Like, what's the goal? You're stretching me like this, and it hurts like hell.
um,
What do you, what why? What are you doing it for? And
right,
and so I think as long as we can work to connect some kind of functional um, activity out of it, um, and if it's not relevant to your kid, chuck it. I'm sorry, I'm one of those. Just chuck it. I mean, we only live once, and if it's just not where your kid's at, then do something else with that time, or talk to the therapist about changing up the plan or whatever. Because it's just, I worry that we do what therapists just want or whatever. And I'm just for a kind of follow the kid, watch for those moments where the intervention can be put in, and it's not an easy battle at all, as Charmaine can tell you, to get push-in services and to have that kind of model. But it's a worthwhile battle to struggle for, because I think it gives kids more agency about who they are and what they want to do, and it also gives just more relevance. And if it's just not relevant to the kid, especially at that time, um, then then like I said, maybe it's time to shake things up a little bit, and just to remember that you're always the mom or the dad. You know your kid, and they know a lot of things about. I'm going off on a thing about therapists, but you can tell it's been an issue for me. Um, they know they know theory, and they know your kid some too, but you get that gut feeling. You know that look on his or her face. You know that thing that they can't understand or know, they because you're the parent. And so just don't be afraid to speak up to the master's degree or the doctorate, is what I the wall of credentials, I've called it at different times, because um, you may not have them, but the credentials, that is, but you have the ultimate knowledge of knowing your kid.
Yeah, exactly. And if your mom is watching us live, she can say hi to you in the comments.
I know. Let's hope she got clicked in. I hope so. Uh,
and and just to remind people that are watching the replay, you can still type in comments and questions, because I'll circle back here and look at those, and we'll respond to them. But yeah, I think I love how you said, like, how sometimes those advocacy struggles, um, when you see that final outcome, you know that it was worth going. It was worth going through, right? Oh, good. Your mom says, "I'm watching." She's
okay.
watching, and she's got eyes on you.
She's got eyes on me. Okay, I'm glad.
Well, I
Uh,
get to say hi to Sue virtually, because I have heard so many wonderful stories about your mom, and yeah, your relationship with her, and just how she is still such a cheerleader for you, even as an adult.
Absolutely. I wouldn't have taken some of the risks that I've taken. One of the things is I got into a really progressive high school, an experiential learning based high school, and went on several trips, and with my fellow students. And so a lot of those experiences too, of learning by doing,
Mhm.
what shaped who I was, and kind of the risk taking, the good risk taking, that I've taken and done some of this thing. And I'll tell you, I don't want to sugarcoat anything. That this living in Washington D.C. thing and doing this thing, that is it's still the toughest thing I did have done, and it's still a struggle. And this is kind of maybe my next step, is that I work full time, and so I make too much money to qualify for the service that would give me more assistance in the home.
Huh.
So I have to some, like today at 6 o'clock, my housekeeper, and thank God, she's coming in and gonna help organize me a little bit. but finding those filling those gaps that are there, it's still very hard. And I've had some depression and anxiety as well, and struggle with some of those issues. So I always get, when I talk, and people are always like, and I really don't take this as a compliment. You're so high functioning, and I'm like, I, is there a better
Cringe.
way? Yeah, it's just like I don't, as compared to, and why should we be ranking people's human experience and how they are like that? Um, but and it dismisses the struggle. But I often think that parents think, well, he's got this perfect life, and look at him, he got so, and it's just not true. It's been a hardcore 11 years, and so just know that it doesn't really stop. Unfortunately, when you live with the disability, you're constantly having to look for services, or and I know lots of moms like my mom that are still helping and championing and kind of being the moral support of their kid as an adult, because it's hard to stitch together a life. Life is hard. And it, so I don't want people to think that it's just all flowers all the time, and
Right.
can't.
Well, and I know earlier we were talking about, you know, mass transportation and, how even big cities in our country don't have, transportation systems that are accessible. And so I think if you want to talk about that, and then we'll take a couple comments from our audience.
Oh, sure. I just wanted to talk about the transportation and how I get from here to there. And Washington D.C. has one of, I don't know if it's the most, but in the United States, it's got to be in the top three at
Huh.
least of most accessible transportation systems. I can go on any bus at any time and have a expectation. Hope to God the lift is working. That's always helpful. But can have a meaningful expectation that I can get on the bus and they have to take me, et cetera, et cetera. I use the metro or the subway system, and it really is a pedestrian or a walk and wheel friendly city. DC is, and so I can use the metro to get to my closest stop and enjoy whatever I was going to do all over the city, and it's accessible. And they retrofitted the elevators, which can sometimes be a problem. I'm not gonna
I was
lie.
going to say those metro elevators aren't very dependable, or sometimes.
No, I have an alert on my. I have certain elevators
Huh.
that are on my list, and so I get an alert when
Oh,
they're out,
huh.
and I have to kind of navigate, kind of plan B. But
Huh.
but people have always said, "Well, when are you going to come back to Colorado?" And it's like the thing I would lose would be my mobility. So that's a big deal.
Yeah, that's
And
huge.
so and so so having to balance that independence and that is a big deal. So transportation is huge. I'm sure in
Yes.
Idaho it's very hard when it's car dependent.
Yeah, I mean, it's, the for Boise, we live in a suburb from out of Boise, and they have a city bus system that is very limited, the amount of runs they do, and then just the area that they go to. So it's really it's not something that you can depend on. And then I look at like how that narrows down choices for people. One,
Right.
they either stay there and not have a way of getting around when they want to and go where they want to, um, or it limits them to making a choice of what's another city that can provide that
Right.
mobility for me,
Right. Right.
So yeah, that's and so I was going to bring up Winona's black feather comments. She said, this past year I finally got the school to put him in a reading class for students with dyslexia. I cannot afford to get the official diagnosis. His reading ability has increased tremendously. Yeah, and so those services, right? They don't automatically come. I mean,
No.
it's something you have to know about to be able to ask for, right? For what your child specifically needs.
Right. And I'm not saying I know I went on a little tangent there about therapy, but I'm not saying those services aren't good or beneficial or necessary. I'm just saying balance is necessary too. And I'm really glad that his reading level's gone up. That's cool. I hope he feels good about himself. Um, uh, and it's often ooh, I just heard thunder. But anyway, sorry. It's often those invisible disabilities too, like dyslexia, that it's harder to people notice when I come in the wheelchair, and that certain accommodations are kind of presumed. But when you have an invisible disability, that's not the case. And then even more important is the self-advocacy skills that he may have to have with his future employer about things or whatever. And I'm not saying think way ahead, like far, far in advance, but those self-advocacy skills and those services now will help him in the employment environment too.
Right. Yeah.
Because
And go ahead.
you can't get accommodations as an adult unless you disclose the disability. So you have to disclose the disability to get the reasonable accommodation. And I think a lot of times, especially those who have invisible disabilities, they want to keep it quiet. But if you keep it quiet, you won't get the reasonable accommodation, or at least the protection or your right to a reasonable accommodation.
Right. Yeah, and you look at I mean there's so many topics we could go to. I mean, and then you look at employment, right? I mean, that's like this whole other aspect of life. I know a lot about my rights and Dylan's rights when he was in the education system. When he left that and became an adult, I mean, that system of employment, that system of how do you get help for adults, the issue of do we have inclusive opportunities for adults? I mean, it is like such another whole system, several to get to know and to
Right,
figure out.
right. I would encourage those watching, get to know the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities
Right,
Act, and Section 504 of the Rehab Act.
right,
I've become a legal nerd having done advocacy all these years, but get to know those laws just as well as you know IDEA, because
right,
IDEA is at least at its best, it's stitched together a little bit. It's under one roof. It may be a dysfunctional family at times, but it's under one roof. Everybody's under one roof. When you become adult, everything scatters, and
yeah,
and it's and you need to know the different rules and regs of Social Security, housing, and all those things. So become familiar with Section 504 of the Rehab Act and the ADA as well as you can, because those have to, they don't create services, but they can defend you and get you some services. So
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And I'll make sure I put links for those in my newsletter going out tomorrow. So if people are listening live or on the replay and you don't get my weekly newsletter, you can sign up at iep.today /weekly adv tips. And for tomorrow's newsletter, we'll be summarizing some of the points that Ian made today. And I know I'll be making some quote cards for Facebook because I love some of the things that you've already said today, Ian. So keep your comments and questions coming. And let's see, I'll move back over here. We also had Karen recently join us. Karen lives in Colorado, and she's had a busy day with kids, and that
oh
happens, right?
that happens, man. I hats off to you. I'm sorry, or maybe it was a good busy day. I don't know, but you're welcome anytime. It's okay that you're late. Yeah.
So, Ian, I think I just appreciate your perspective and uh, in so many different areas. And I don't know, what other advice maybe would you have for parents? I think one of the topics that I've been reading about, and now I'm trying to think of the name of the article. Shoot, I can't think of what it was, but it the point that they were making was sometimes self advocates are kind of at a disagreement with parents and their advocacy. And the articles specifically talked about, when parents are advocating for something that their child doesn't want,
Right.
or they're framing their child's disability from that pity, ableist kind of bias. And self advocates are saying, that doesn't really help us. So I don't know if you have any thoughts or wisdom for us as parents, like how we can make sure we're aligned with what our kids want.
Well, I can't guarantee that, of course, but I can certainly say that communication and constantly kind of hopefully together adjusting things um, help. And I will say these legal based organizations that the National Disability Rights supervise, we are client based, so we
Hmm.
won't listen to the parent.
Huh.
So if the parent's calling on behalf of the kid or the adult now or whatever, will eventually, or the people will eventually want to talk to the person with the disability. And if there's a disagreement, then I just wanted to share how the PNAs work. If there's a disagreement, they're going to represent the person with the disability and not the parent.
Huh.
So, um, so those are really ugly situations, and they're not common, but you just got to keep communicating. And I think the one thing my mom did throughout the years is and here's another little saying that I certainly didn't come up with, but it's the dignity of risk,
Right.
and that is the dignity to take a chance at something. And sometimes really uh, you can really tumble at it, or you maybe it was a great success. This certainly, yeah, this Washington D.C. thing certainly was an example of dignity at risk. And you just have to be in constant communication um, with your kid about things, and hopefully you'll evolve together. But ultimately, the law sees them as adults at 18 unless you go in and get guardianship, but don't get me started about guardianship. That's a whole nother webcast. But
Yes.
um, use shared decision making. Google that, and there's a lot of good stuff that can be an alternative to guardianship, or at least total guardianship. You may have partial guardianship, but shared decision making is a really cool way of doing the alternative and not getting people with disabilities stuck in this legal trap that's guardianship sometimes. So
Right.
just ask Britney Spears. That's all I'll
I,
say.
yeah.
And um, and so you just have to be communicating. That's the simplest answer I can come up with. And hopefully you're on the same um, team. I will say you brought up something, Charmaine, that I think is important. It is really hard. My mom fought for inclusion. Um, you know, I fought for inclusion for other families. It is really hard out in the world to find inclusive opportunities for for things for adults with disabilities, and I don't have the answer or the energy to know how to fix that, but I just wanted to highlight that as something that people can do in your professions. If you're architects, if you're recreation planners, if you're anything, think about the community, because sometimes the community can be a little rough. For as much as we advocate for it, and I'm still pro community 100%, but it can be a little rough because there is kind of a dearth of services sometimes, or a dearth of inclusive
Right.
opportunities. And um, so there's that. So there's that work to be done too. And it's hard to know how to do that except just chip away at some of those things. Um,
Right. Oh, I
yeah.
know. And Karen picked up on when you were talking about dignity of risk, and she said, I heard that expression on the new documentary from Samuel Habib. She said the dignity of risk, love it, reminds us that it's important to let all kids try and fail at some things.
Right. Absolutely. And, kids with disabilities, we're not little fragile angels that don't deserve the, uh, that don't, that are exempted from the pain of failure,
Right.
I guess. And if you're sheltering your kid from that pain always, it's going to come back at you. Uh, um, all I can say is that's when kids don't disagree with or don't agree with parents, and there's a disagreement there. It's when parents don't let their kids and adults be adults and kids and take risks like you might in life. And that's when parents become way too overbearing. um, that's when the disagreements come. Um, and I'll say too that um, you know I'm an inclusionist 100%, but also it's really fun sometimes. There's a group of us that work for disability rights, and we are just people with various disabilities, and we hang out every once in a while and talk shop. Sometimes we don't. We do. So, hanging out with disabled people is not always it's great. But what the difference is, it's my choice. It's my
Yes.
choice, and it's not the only option around. So
Yes.
that's the difference, is when it's the only option and it's not a choice, then we're getting into segregation and some of the problems with that.
Yeah, I those are excellent points. Um, And I think too about, sometimes how you talk about, be careful what you ask for. And so many parents ask for a one-on-one, pair support for their child, and not really differentiate when the child really needs extra adult support, and instead make it this blanket, I want to pair with my kid all the time. And that's where I see so many times, then kids aren't allowed to make mistakes. And, sometimes I think that could be the training, and, the parent feels like they're supposed to be there to help the child not make mistakes
Right,
and be
right.
successful. And it's like, no, I mean, we all can think back on some life lessons we've learned because of mistakes. And when we take that opportunity away from kids, we're not doing them any favors.
No, and I think that well trained kind of para that can kind of map out situations as they go. I mean, it's really hard to find a great super para. I mean, it's just hard to find the one that, because they got to click with your kid too, hopefully.
Right.
And um but they're just not the only answer either, because that a poorly trained para can exclude your kid more than include your kid. And a lot of parents, I think, make the mistake. He needs a para so he can be in the classroom all day. Well, if he's always with an adult and the adult is making the decisions, or protecting, or kind of doing that, then that's exclusion too. Now, I've had school districts throw that in my face too, I will say, and say, well, that's a more restrictive environment. Well, let's talk about that. Some interesting uh, interpretation of the law.
Right.
And I know we're almost at the hour, but that that is not fair, and it's not a good interpretation of the law, but it is true in a non-legal human sense, that you can have an adult that's there to help you, but you're still excluded.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Excellent point. Amy is with us, and Amy says, I would recommend every parent who has a child with disabilities take classes or workshops so they can learn that it's still okay for your child to try things. It also teaches parents advocating for their kiddos. If only I knew for my oldest who has autism. Yeah, thank you, Amy, because yeah, your experience is important for others to reap the benefits of, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's a really cool, and maybe I'll end, everybody talks about autism, and, it's like the disability that is, you know, I don't know, it's like the disability that everyone's talking to about, and it's getting funded in certain ways that I don't think are good. So I want to promote the Autistic Self Advocacy Network, ASAN, ASAN. If you Google that, we may not, they do terrific self advocate, people centered stuff. No offense to other autism groups, but they're more into the research and the cure and the therapies and stuff, and the inclusive cool kids on the block. It's a it's ASAN, Autistic Self Advocacy Network. They do great work, so I enjoy working with them. So
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up as another resource. I'll make sure I put that link out for everybody. Um, do you have time that we could take a couple more comments here, Ian?
sure, absolutely.
Okay. Um, let's see. So Karen says, we've had a lot of discussions about my kid needing opportunities to have space instead of being policed constantly. And
Yeah,
and
and
As a note, let me just show you this too, Ian. She says it's okay to offend other autism groups.
Okay. Well, I'm just not a big fan of Autism Speaks,
Right.
and they're just so well funded, and so they often are on the panels and are on in the discussions and at the conferences, and I just that bugs me because I don't always agree with their orientation towards autism as and they would disagree with me, but we can't always see autism as a problem, something that needs to be fixed or cured. There are
Right.
plenty of successful people with autism. So just so I'm just a little leery of Autism Speaks, um, and then yeah, ironically, people with disabilities are policed more than any other kid in the building,
Yeah.
and you can't get away with anything. I mean, I had therapists watching me. If I wasn't using my walker, the hours that I said I had people,
Right.
it's really a problem, and it's so absolutely ask for space and tell them to back off because it's true.
Right. Well, and Abby is a parent trailblazer from Kentucky, and she says, "Thank you, all great information." Um, and yeah, Karen says that she really appreciates everything that she's been learning from you, and she's going to go back to watch that replay when she was so busy with her kids.
Yes, yes, absolutely. um yeah, I this has been great, and have me back
Yes,
anytime. Yeah.
yes. Well, thank you so much because you have been able to give us some perspectives that we don't often have on the show. And so I need to be aware of bringing more disability rights advocates on and speaking for what their perspective is, and the life that they've lived, because we can keep learning so much from you. And I know I appreciated when we were both in Colorado and the trainings that I was able to go to that you were speaking at, and how much I learned from you. And I'm just really happy that we are connected and that we can still be supporting each other as you're making change on the national level. And I'm trying to make some inroads in Idaho and,
Right.
and some other states around the country. But yeah, it's really nice.
It takes all of us and all of us at
Yeah.
different levels to be pushing for people with disabilities. We are probably the largest minority in the country, and it doesn't get talked about like that, but it's true. There's like
Yes.
45 million of us out
Yes.
there.
Yes.
So this is an issue that won't go away. So keeping on and fight the good fight and all that good stuff.
Yes. Yes. We will. But thanks so much, Ian.
Thank
And
you.
just to remind our viewers that this summer we are only doing 2 live shows a month. So we will return on June 16th with another live show at noon Mountain Time. And until then, go play with your kids and have fun this summer, right?
Absolutely. Go swimming.
Yes.
Go
Yes.
swimming.
Use those muscles in fun ways.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Take
Okay.
care.
Take care.